I'd like to introduce Lee Rhiannon. For over 5 decades, Lee Rhiannon has worked on environmental, social justice and industrial campaigns. She was a Greens New South Wales State MP and then a Senator for 18 years. She currently works with various communities struggling for self-determination, peace and justice in their home country. Over to you, Lee Rhiannon.
Thanks very much. I do acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay tribute to their history, their culture and their ongoing fight for justice, considering all the crimes that continue to be perpetrated against First Nations people. Look, a huge congratulations. 20 years is always impressive for an organisation to be around for that amount of time doing fantastic work. But it's also no mean feat for a progressive organisation which is out there challenging the insidious aspects of international trade agreements. Where they're using trade to try and override labour, environmental, occupational health and safety standards. I also want to say it's a pleasure to share this platform. Doug Cameron and I are the two speakers first off. Doug and I were in the Senate together. We worked on many campaigns. Obviously there was differences, but so much in common, working on issues from public housing, equality, union rights issues. And I can say it was a pleasure to see how Doug annoyed the bejesus out of the coalition MPs. And I've got to say that when I left Parliament, and then I knew that Doug was retiring, that I was worried who would take on Doug's role. And I feel that we're still waiting, but it's good to share this platform together because I enjoyed very much working with him. It's also an evening where it's a huge congratulations to Pat Reynolds. AFTINET is recognised today as a formidable organisation for the work of many people, but also particularly Pat. Pat has a wonderful way to work collectively with so many. Pat and I met in the late 1990s, and I did want to reflect on that period because, to my mind, what AFTINET has achieved, the importance of its work and how it undertakes that work is very interesting and I think significant for these times that we're now in when you consider what the 1990s were like. At the end of the 1990s, globalisation was a buzzword. Like seriously, this was a heyday for neoliberalism. They really did see that trade agreements were like an opportunity where they could walk all over what the progressive movement had achieved significantly over many decades, where there were standards in terms of labour rights, occupational health and safety, the environment, and people were working collectively together. There was a sense of the common good. But here they were seeing that trade deals gave them an opportunity to sidestep so much of what had been achieved. In the 1990s, I was working with an organisation called AidWatch. We come together to monitor Australia's aid because so much of the government aid was going to international finance institutions, bilateral programs, and much of that was very damaging. And this is where I would find that I was often bumping up against people working on trade issues, or it would cross over into our work. But what I found is that when so much of our work was working publicly to build awareness, to try and achieve social change, when you got on to talking about trade issues, seriously, people's eyes would glaze over. It was really hard to engage with it. And Doug and I were just chatting, and he was making the comment that at the end of the 1990s, even the ACTU, there wasn't that work being done about trade, and there were so few organisations working on it. And when you did try and engage with it, it was largely impenetrable. And you know what it's like with so many of these trade agreements, they're like alphabet soup. And at that time, it was GATT and it was NAFTA. So you had to try and unpackage this. So that was tough going. But then along comes a multilateral agreement on investment, and that was well covered in the video. Now, this was, as the video explained, it was the first one that a community campaign actually was able to knock off. And how we achieved that was through alliance building. And this, again, is what AFTINET over these 20 years has just undertaken in a most commendable way. So in that multilateral agreement on investment, there was a whole lot of us. There was those of us working in the aid sector, There was many unions, there was religious groups, there was environment groups. I remember that there was about 20 organisations for much of the time, and it was through that, and it was global too. This was a good globalisation that was really out there to expose these secret deals and what they were trying to do. So that was the early days. So again, a little bit of just a comment reflecting on the video. I thought the video gave a wonderful summary, and you're again seeing the strength of AFTINET. Like, they've pulled in so many people, rank and file people, people who are now doing fantastic work like Sally McManus, Sharon Burrows, and also there was two of the forerunners of Doug and myself, former senators Kerry Nettle and Vicky Bourne. Both worked closely with AFTINET in taking the battle into Parliament, launching AFTINET reports, speaking at their rallies. And again, what I think we need to reflect on with AFTINET, because it really is actually, to my mind, a very good model of how progressive community organisations could work, because they bring together in-depth analysis with on-the-ground achievements, and they're building alliances all the time, and they're taking the advocacy into Parliament. And that's very significant and very necessary. There was so much, their briefings in Parliament were fantastic. When you're an MP, people like Pat and those people who would come and lobby us and explain what was going on were just worth their weight in gold, considering the amount of work that's to be done. Just to comment on one, in 2015, another vegetable soup one, TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, at that time, and this is the case with so many of these agreements, as we know, it's secret. So believe it or not, after this huge fight, which there's obviously a lot more detail behind this, that was agreed that the MPs could see the text, but they couldn't talk about it. At any rate, so it goes on and on and on. You know, we've had chapter, we've had so many different, there's PACER Plus that's also come up. And again, these terms just, you know, they're so hard for people to understand what it all means. I think one that's worth, and again, it was covered in what we've just seen there now, seen in the video, but it's worth mentioning again because it keeps bobbing up. And this is the investor-state dispute settlement. Now, this is really, really, really extraordinary, and we always need to comment on this, where corporations, everything shifts to favour corporations. So it means that governments are seriously signing over, so multinationals have the right to sue governments. So how it works in summary is if a law changes and that the company deems that it's to their disadvantage from how it operated before, well, then they can sue. So like that would just decimate society. So the battle against that AFTINET, like many others, has just been huge. And I think it's worth just reminding ourselves, what's the common thread here? Why are conservative governments and corporations fighting so hard for these free trade agreements? So they can make more profits. And how do they make more profits? By cutting corners on environmental standards, on how unions operate, and on health and safety on the job. So that's, you know, the battle goes on. 20 years has been something to well celebrate. I look forward to toasting at the end. It's been a pleasure to working with Pat and your team, and I look forward to the rest of the evening, and I particularly look forward when we can all be together. Thank you very much.